Thank you. Well, I hope you guys all had a fun time here in Omaha. For those that aren't from Nebraska, it is a pretty cool, special place, and most certainly no shortage of beer out there. So, um, obviously, you see some purple up here. I'm actually formerly with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and just recently transitioned down to Kansas State University. So John asked me to go ahead and talk a little bit about the history of the TAPS program. I also have Chris Proctor in the back. Chris, do you want to come on up? He's going to tag team this with me a little bit to give an overview. I have 30 minutes, so I'm going to just kind of go through it pretty quick. Chris and I have about 50 slides. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat. But sorry guys, there's no shortage of challenges that we're dealing with irrigated agriculture. Chris, can you help me out for a second?
Yeah, no, welcome. I'm Chris. I'm the new Darren in Nebraska. And so I think the idea is just to highlight, what's driving TAPS, where does TAPS come from? And so I think a lot, as you think about the challenges, water's been the big one that's driving it. And so I think, Darren, you can speak to starting this back in, was it 2017 and where some of those initial ideas came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that, guys. So as I was mentioning, we most certainly have a lot of challenges. And so when we think about what we were trying to do at the university, we were struggling with how do we properly engage with our producers around some of the technology and resources out there to help hopefully mitigate some of these issues. And so obviously there's no shortage of some of these growing concerns. As I have transitioned down to Kansas, we've most certainly have recognized the issues primarily around depleted groundwater resources. And then also, as we talked a little bit, and what I've heard earlier today is we're also battling some of the water quality concerns primarily around groundwater nitrate contamination. Now, with that being said, there's plenty of innovation, and what we're really wanting to do in the TAPS program is to be able to pull some of that innovation and get it at the fingertips of producers that might not otherwise have had an opportunity to connect with that. And we've had a lot of different ways of thinking about trying to do that. And so in extension and research, we've done things with on-farm research, we have demonstration trials, we put out different educational workshops, and we definitely get a good crowd. We have a lot of repeated individuals. And so we were trying to think of what could we do slightly different to generate some excitement, to pull people into the university, to pull industry and some of their solutions. And so with that, we kind of came up with this idea of hosting a farm management competition. And really, again, what we're trying to do is improve that adoption of practices that we feel highly confident will make a difference to mitigate some of those growing concerns around water availability. And so with that, as Chris mentioned, our TAPS program started in 2017. Now we actually have competitions in Nebraska. We have them in Kansas, or starting in Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and then we're also going to be developing in Texas. And there's also even competitions down in Florida. So each competition is designed a little bit different, but what we wanted to do is get to beyond just talking about water. So although I'm an irrigation guy, Chris is a cropping systems and weed specialist, sometimes we need to go a step farther, right? So we want to get into that profitability, the total systems approach, right? Because we know water's one, but there's other agronomic factors. And so within these competitions, we actually have a series of decisions that producers are making. Now, instead of doing it on their farm, we came up with the idea of bringing everybody to a central location, and we want to treat this as a research experiment. And so basically, let's say in this picture, that's 2019, there were 24 teams competing against each other. Each team had 3 randomized plots within that experimental layout. And so the decisions that individuals are making, producers or groups of producers, we take those decisions and then we implement them on those randomized plots. And then at the end of the day, what we're able to do is look at in a controlled environment, so the same soil underneath the same irrigation system with the same planter, basically what came out in terms of differences in input use efficiency, profitability, yield, and so forth. Chris, do you want to mention kind of the layout where some of the participants are from?
Yeah, I mean, so it's been interesting. You bring everything to a centralized location. I think the temptation is just the local folks in that area to want to compete because they're familiar with. But what we found is that we're really able to draw people from all across Nebraska and actually across states broader than Nebraska. And so I think this last year we had a popcorn competition. We had a couple participants even coming from France. And so it's been interesting to see the draw. And I think that's what's interesting about this is the things that people engage with and the types of things I think you have to think through and learn. There's a regional aspect to it, but there's a lot about just how do you manage water? How do you manage nutrients? How do you make these different decisions and what impacts do they have? Those are broader than regional decisions. And so we found that people are able to engage and compete from a lot broader range. And so you can just see from 2019 where those teams are coming from.
So when we started in 2017, it was a single competition in North Platte with 18 producers made up of, or 15 teams made up of 18 producers. And so as mentioned, now we're basically across 5 different states with some competitions having upwards of 80 people competing against each other. And so definitely a lot of different philosophies on how to manage that water as well as that crop. And we get to see it kind of play out, and we'll show some of those results here today. So it is a competition, and so these teams are competing to be designated most profitable, most efficient in terms of water and nitrogen management. And then also we do have a greatest grain yield, but that cash award is highly dependent on how profitable you are because we are not a yield competition. We're really trying to drive that efficiency and profitability. So the typical look of a competition is it is an 11-month process. So again, what we're trying to do is capture the full single year farm business from agronomic decisions as well as how you market and ensure that crop. And so this is just kind of, again, what that might look like as well as some of the events that we have as part of the program.
So what's also been fun about this is just the number of partners that have been engaged. And so, you know, this is just 2023, but I think if you were to make a list over the years, right, it's a lot of different folks are engaged in this process. Being that we're at the CropX meeting, you know, I was just talking with Darren, I think starting back in 2017 or 2018 rather, that partnership started. And so it's been kind of a long ongoing partnership just in terms of CropX engaging with this TAPS process and be able to provide data to the participants that are involved. And it's interesting to see as those technologies are available. I think it helps people are able to kind of try before you buy might be one way to think about it. So they're engaged with these technologies, understand how they're working, see how those decisions play out without having to jump in within their own operation. So this part's been really cool.
So one thing we realized real quick through this competition, we wanted to be as closely connected to what you would see actually at a production scale farm. And so although we are at research sites, we do use production scale if you consider a 6-row unit production. But the point being is we're not using plot combines and plot planters. We're not hand harvesting. We definitely want to use the technology that we are promoting at field level. And so some of the competitions we focused on, so sprinkler irrigated corn, subsurface drip irrigated corn, we've done cotton, sorghum, dryland wheat. And so there's been a number of crops, and most certainly we have all that information if there's a crop and system type that you're interested in. So one of the best parts here, and obviously we've had the privilege of working directly with CropX and then formerly CropMetrics, which they started with us in 2018. But really, again, is we want to put some of the solutions at the hands of our producers. And so as part of the competition, because we are asking individuals to make these decisions in real time, and so we have sensor data coming, so soil moisture monitoring, plant sensors, we have imagery, we have decision support tools, and then our research team also collects things like biomass, grain samples, looking at nitrogen uptake. We look at soils in terms of How much residual nitrogen did you leave? How much did you leach below your root system at the end of the year? And so it really does give us an opportunity as researchers to look at kind of how things played out. But then more importantly, it gives exposure and opportunity for producers to try some of this technology with no risk to their own operation. So just want to show what a few of those look like. So as mentioned, so we had soil moisture monitoring devices. We have canopy temperature. We've done dendrometry, remote sensing. And one thing that we feel is very critical and important is that every team within these irrigated competitions has a in-field sensor that they can actually look at any time to inform their decision. And so the way our irrigations work, so in North Platte, Nebraska, we run that system every Monday and every Thursday, guaranteed. And so unless we cancel it because of a rainfall exceeding a certain amount. So individuals, whether they're located 3 states over, they will go in, they can use the technology that's in their plots at North Platte, Nebraska, or Fort Collins or Colby, Kansas. They can take that information and then they submit how much irrigation they want to us, and then we will put that in our prescription and upload it into the pivot. And so we really are getting close to real-time irrigation management in a controlled environment. One of the neat things, especially with CropX, and it was touched on earlier by Ben, the opportunity for some of that consulting and direct interface between the producers and industry. And so obviously CropX being able to provide that technology, but then also providing feedback, and then that end of the year report has really been a benefit to our producers as part of these competitions. Just again, some additional data. So this is out of the CSU TAPS program in Fort Collins. So here's soil signal. So some additional data that they're being able to provide access to the producers. Oh, there we go. No, we're still good. One of the other things that we want to do is collect some additional research data. John Gates, one of his former colleagues at the University of Nebraska, Trenton, France. So we actually mounted some cosmic ray probes right there on the pivot. So as the system goes through, we can look at basically spatial soil water dynamics within that. And so now this isn't necessarily data that is going to be usable by the producer, but it does allow us to pull some additional research value from the TAPS competitions. Again, as new technologies come into the market, whether that's Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, we do have the opportunity to introduce those. So when Phytech came in quite a few years ago, we were able to provide that as a solution or an option for people to try out as part of the competition. And then we can start to look at what does that compare to some of the techniques that producers maybe already are used to. And so, for example, in this case, a single producer, we went ahead and they had an AquaSpy as well as Phytech. And so we can talk about what that information looks like when we're talking from a soil moisture perspective versus data that's coming from what a plant is suggesting from the shrinking and swelling of what a dendrometer will provide you. We capture quite a bit of information. So we have drone sensing. We're very interested in trying to disentangle and understand that water nitrogen dynamics. And so we will go ahead and do canopy sensing using some of our research instrumentation. So we'll look at canopy temperature. We'll look at canopy reflectance. We'll take that data, we'll break it apart in their plots. And so we can basically say, well, if you looked at NDRE from your plot, how did that compare to maybe some of our traditional practices for determining sufficiency of nitrogen? And so we might actually compare that to our leaf tissue samples from a commercial lab. And so basically building confidence in some of these techniques that go beyond a physical sample. Similar for canopy temperature, we can start to look at, when we think of, I think, more conditioned to understanding what the soil is telling us from a soil moisture standpoint. But as some of these products are developing around canopy temperature and those thermal responses, we can start to show what does that look like in terms of differences across irrigation? And then also, how does that tie back to soil water depletion? So some of this is for our benefit as researchers, but it also provides us a little bit more confidence as these tools come out on the market. So what Chris and I are going to do now is I want to give you a sense of what a competition looks like and some of the outcomes from it. So I'm going to pick on 2021. So this is sprinkler irrigated corn in North Platte. There was approximately 60 teams that competed across those 32 teams. So again, each team of producers had 3 randomized plots as shown in the picture. So again, we're asking a lot from our producers, right? So obviously they get the benefit of free use of technology. They get to test their practices. They maybe get to try something completely new that they'd never done before. But again, it's a commitment. It's an 11-month commitment. And you can see across those 32 teams, we had nearly 500 decisions submitted as part of that competition. Now, what I think it becomes more fascinating when you think of the same location with the same rain, the same soil type, you know, we had a difference across those teams from 1.5 to over 15 inches of applied water. We had 105 to nearly 300 pounds of nitrogen applied across those teams. We had every team did a different approach on how they managed that nitrogen, if they wanted it as side dress, or how they thought about doing fertigation, which is an option in our competition. Hybrid selection, seeding rate, very much, I think any grower would speak to how critical that decision is. And that most certainly comes in and has had an impact in terms of how those hybrids respond to the water and fertility that we apply. And then finally, down at the bottom, you can see how that result kind of played out from a yield standpoint and profitability. Graphically, I want to show this. Obviously, CropX, there's been a lot of conversations around irrigation. So this is that cumulative irrigation trends across those 32 teams. And so we had upwards of 15 inches down to 1.5 inches. So again, considerable. And then the questions we start to ask is, why are individuals making the decisions? Are they using the technology? What technology are they using? And basically understand how at the university can we help promote and improve some of these decisions. So again, yield ranged basically from 130 to 274. I'm not going to dive into this efficiency calculation, but basically we tie in both water and nitrogen because those are so critically tied together. As mentioned, I think, John, you said earlier, and we don't want to treat them separate because we know how critical and how tangled they are. And so this efficiency basically promotes both. So we want to be good stewards of both of those inputs. And then finally, profitability. And this is overly critical because it gets to the root of how we think about farming as not just an agronomic endeavor, but also a farm business. And so it ties everything from good production practices to how well we market that commodity. All right, so in terms of what some of the output looks like, and I'm overly fascinated hearing about some of the ET solutions that CropX and Ranke is putting out there. Because one of the things that we understand the soil moisture dynamics, and I think people truly understand ET, but when we can put that into an irrigation scheduling, put it in context of irrigation scheduling, there has been quite a bit of information from TAPS to support. And so that upper ET range basically is an ET model that would suggest using scientific-based scheduling how much we would want to put on. And then that lower range is kind of that 80% where you wouldn't expect to suppress too much or have minimal impact on yield. And we found that that actually fits beautifully in terms of how well we are in terms of efficiency and then also profitability. And so again, tying in some of those technologies has really been quite beneficial. I'm not sure, I think we got a few minutes and I want to leave questions for Chris and I, but I'm going to go through one more example specifically around CropX. I got up this morning and went through the 2022 sprinkler corn competition, and I looked at two teams that both had a CropX sensor. And so Farm 10 versus Farm 24, You can see that there was two different hybrids selected. So Channel versus Pioneer, put on very similar amounts of total nitrogen fertilizer, but the irrigation difference was considerable. And so 6.1 inches versus Farm 24 was 15. And so this is what their soil moisture profile looked like using the CropX sensor. And so you can see Farm 10, really, if they trusted and used that sensor, it provided clear evidence that they were in a very sensitive period, and they were most certainly influencing or had the potential to influence their yield, which it most certainly, and I'll show in the next slide, it did. And so I circled that period right there because that was right around silking, and that Farm 10 only put on just shy of 2 inches. But when you look at the evapotranspiration as well as the amount of rainfall, it most certainly was short as compared to Farm 24, which actually was the highest yielding and one of the higher efficiency teams in that competition. And so when you compare that, basically there was 100 bushel per acre difference across this competition. And most of that could have been completely avoided by the use and trust in some of our technology that we have at our fingertips. And this is what that looks like graphically. Farm 10 is the orange down at the bottom versus Farm 24 up at the top. All right, so with that, I'm going to close on this one final slide. In addition to some of the research and understanding the agronomic practices and the use of technology, we do work with some of our behavioral scientists. And what we're wanting to do is, again, understand what information are people using and how can we best appropriately align industry and producers and the research sector to basically promote these advanced tools. And so since it is a competition where people submit decisions through forms, we can actually go and pop up a question box to basically understand what actually informed that decision. And so in 2022 and 2021, we actually asked at the time of that last decision for irrigation, basically what informed that. And you can see basically over 50% in both years, it was informed by soil moisture monitoring. And so that most certainly is highly encouraging as compared to more of a calendar date or intuition. So with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And if we have time, I think Chris and I can take any questions.
Yeah, we have a question here on the app. Will you be placing an ET sensor in the next year?
Where would we place an ET sensor?
Or
would we?
Or would you use one for the competition?
Absolutely. And so in our first year in 2017, we actually, Lycor brought a mobile eddy covariance system. Now, what we struggled with a little bit is how do we provide valuable ET data when the sensor has a footprint that exceeds the size of the plots? And so visiting with John out there with the new ET product, one way that we've gone about it is we actually will put it in an adjacent part of the field that is under fully irrigated of a representative crop that we make sure is fully fertilized, fully irrigated, and basically use that as a proxy of information that can basically feed back into a producer's decision. Oh, yeah. So Mark Burbach, so he's our behavioral scientist at UNL. And so him and his team, they've dove into that. And so there's two parts. So the one, they went ahead and evaluated and had interviews with producers that have competed. And then they've also had conversations with the non-producing or non-producer teams. So your crop consultants or seed providers, agency personnel, so others that are part of the competition. So most certainly the motivators are very different, right? And so from a producer standpoint, we have kind of two groups. So some are very interested in truly testing what they're doing on their operation, and they want to basically have a kind of a check to see how they're comparing against their peers. And then you have the other kind of subgroup is they just simply want to try something different. And so what you'll see is when you look at those irrigation trends, about half of the teams actually, I would say, are deficit irrigating in the competition, right? And so you can see their motivation is really to try to understand that lower limit of what they can get by. And so I think, again, they're using TAPS in the decisions that they're using, the behavior that they're using in the TAPS program supplements what they're doing on their operation, but it's not perfectly transferable. Now, from the industry agency or the non-producer teams, it's really being able to have that common language and truly appreciate the complexity of farming. So it's not just a single decision as, you know, I'm promoting a sensor, and so I'm talking about water management, but then how does that connect to my seed selection? How does that connect to how I market that crop? And so it provides context to those individuals.
Got another question here. What recommendations would you have on trying to get this program started in someone's area?
So I think there's a couple things I would say relative to that. One, I think there's a number of existing competitions, and so I think just participating in one of the ones that's already rolling would be a great place to engage. You know, the more you look at the data, the more we've seen this. I don't know that the regional piece is as important as the big picture overarching decision making and the effects that has. And so we try to find this balance of when do you put on a new competition, when do you go to a new location versus when do you leverage what we already have in place. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's a conversation that'd be interesting to have. I think we chat about it more for sure, but I mean, I don't know, what would you add to that, Darren?
Yeah, I think there's two parts. So one, we don't want to promote, you know, oh, the optimal nitrogen rate was 130 pounds, go take that information and transfer it to your operation. What we want to be able to do is provide data and tools and technology to inform those decisions. And so that knowledge then is transferable. So whether it's a producer that gets a new piece of land, right, or now they're competing in a program in, you know, 2 counties over, they have to look at the soil report, they have to look at the crop history, they have to understand their, you know, what the commercial lab is suggesting from a fertility standpoint, use the in-season tools. And so, as Chris said, in some cases, maybe the best thing you can do is actually compete in an area that you're not from, because it really makes you vulnerable and makes you really question things that you've always just have done because of habit, or because, again, you haven't felt like that had to be questioned.
So there was a producer that competed in Nebraska, from Nebraska, and I think was one of the, you know, higher level competitors, and then went to Oklahoma and competed and came in, I think, dead last in the Oklahoma competition. And when you talk to him, he said, yeah, I came in last and it was a little humbling thinking I came from winning Nebraska down there and not even place. But he said, I learned more competing in the Oklahoma competition than I feel like I did in Nebraska, because you kind of pulled out, you took me out of my comfort zone. You kind of pulled the rug out from under me. I really had to think about my decisions and the impacts of my decisions outside of this. I already understand the context of farming in Nebraska. And so that, to me, that was really interesting insight.
A little bit of rephrase on that one. Some states may not have anything like TAPS. So how do you start from the ground up in that case?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think we have to wrap up. So after this question, right now, one of the things that we've been very fortunate, so NRCS went ahead and provided us a technical agreement to go across our 5 states. And with that technical agreement, it is providing base funds to basically help establish some of the programs from kind of a personnel resource requirement. And so I think there's some opportunity for those programs to be established that were, they weren't able to get past that first hurdle. And so I think there's opportunity there. But if there is an area and an interest, I just please reach out to myself or Chris. We'd be happy to kind of visit and see if we can connect you with individuals if we're not able to help ourselves. But again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Sorry for that rocky start, but yeah, if you're heading back home, safe travels, and hopefully we'll see you guys again soon.